Greetings to you all from Accra, Ghana. I apologize that I'm not able to join you live in person. With the time difference, it's just a lot. And I apologize that this article, my thoughts on the article are coming a little bit after you read it, but I hope that it still proves useful and insightful. So, a little bit about me before I jump in. My name is Dr. Raydell Boateng, and I am a lot of things, but I think most importantly, I um, have done research and study in what it is to be Black American, particularly a Black female and American, and particularly a Black female and an educator and an American, and what that has meant for my experiences in school, both from when I was a student in school, from a young child, all the way up through grad school, and then my time as an educator when I was a classroom teacher to young children, from the ages of, let's say, like 7, 8 up through 12, those ages, which we would consider about, well, probably more like 11, but we would consider that kind of like second through fifth grade in the US context. And then now I am currently a teacher educator, and I work remotely teaching courses in a master's in teaching program at Seattle University on culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. And then I run my own coaching and consulting firm that deals with helping people recognize their journey through into racial justice and liberation on both a personal and professional level. So that little bit of background brings me to why I was really excited to think about this article and kind of just the concepts of Blackness and liberation, and my perspective as an American, but also currently I live in Ghana. So my husband is Ghanaian, and I moved here last year. So I've lived here a year and been here several times to visit prior to that. And so I have that context of also being a Black American now in West Africa, which is predominantly Black, and that experience. So this article is very, very, very interesting to me. Um, and I'm just going to talk through a couple of the points for you. So first and foremost, I appreciate the sentiment of the article and what the author was trying to say, particularly this paragraph where it says Africans are not Black, they're Igbo, Yoruba, Ewe, Akan, Ndebele, they are not Black, they're just themselves, right? And in a general sense, let's say in a particular sense, that is true. That is absolutely true. Tribal culture is real. I haven't been to other parts of Africa, but even in Ghana, tribal culture is real, even though there is kind of a broader, more general culture, just like it's true in the United States and it's probably true in Australia as well. And so tribal culture matters. There are different cultural customs. There are different fabrics and artifacts and cultural relics and traditions from how kings and lineage and all of that is passed down and lives through today. Language, all of that is absolutely true, right? That they're humans on the land, as it says here. Um, and but where I disagree a little bit is further down in the paragraph, this part that's actually highlighted, that says they don't become Black until they go to America or come to Europe. They become Black when they first land into the Western world that chooses to see them that way. And my disagreement here is that the Western world a long time ago landed in Africa, in West Africa, in Ghana. And because of that, Blackness exists in Africa. And so it's not like people don't engage with the Western world, don't engage with concepts of Westernization, don't engage with Westerners themselves until they go to the West. The West is here and the West has been here for a long time. And it's very prevalent in a lot of ways, from things around skin color and skin lightening and the use of brighter and lighter images, colorism, that sort of thing. Um, where lighter skin tones are more valued and appreciated, and the desire to obtain things that are of Western culture. If you look at school names and business names, but school names in particular, which I think thinking about this in the context of education is important, because that just informs so much of the rest of society and vice versa. But if you look at school names, a lot of school names have international in the title, and even like British International or American International or other sort of names and things that are associated particularly with Britain, the UK, and the US, those aspects of Western culture, but also in some cases like Germany, and places in France, places like that. So you see Western culture and the aspiration to adopt Western culture very strong in Ghana in particular. I can speak to Ghana because I live here. And it's not just the names of things, but it's actually the way things, are done. The curriculums that are used in schools are heavily modeled after and follow Western culture to the extent that it 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 promotes this sense of whiteness, that I think in some ways is really unhealthy in terms of having a strong personal identity. Um, the images that you see, the type of curriculum, in the US, and I mentioned I teach a class on culturally responsive teaching, and that's all about basically challenging and dismantling whiteness in schools and curriculums. And yet you have curriculums in schools here that are striving to have those white centered, white culturally centered curriculums. Um, and yeah, so those are just some of the examples that I'm thinking of and just naming for how I think the Western world has landed here in Africa. And it's not just about people going to the West that makes them Black. The West is already here. Another thing actually that comes to mind is the ownership of businesses. You will very often see the workers, whether they're kind of in the back or they're like custodial staff or even working kind of like a front desk or a register. Um, but the people working are Ghanaian. The people who own the businesses, the people who you see in the offices upstairs looking down, or kind of managing the money and all of that. Um, those people tend to be European and white. Often, interestingly enough, there are quite a few businesses owned and run by the Lebanese. The Lebanese community is pretty big in Ghana. And then the Chinese run a lot of businesses as well. So not quite the West, but still not Ghana. It's not the tribes that are mentioned here in this article. So I think these things are really important to consider, in her point of saying that people become Black when they land in the Western world, or the world chooses to see them that way. The Western world has been here for so long. If you come to Ghana and have the opportunity, which I think everybody in the world should, or at least come to one of the Western African nations areas that was involved in the transatlantic slave trade, because when you experience the reality of what that was like and see some of the dungeons inside some of the castles um, that were used to hold my ancestors, the enslaved, before they were put on the ships and taken to other parts of the world against their will. It is emotional and eye-opening, but you kind of see it's like this physical representation of history and the history of the West, the Dutch, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese that were here and established those monuments to enslavement, and a really harsh and ugly period in history that the impact of still lasts today. And so the West coming into Africa and impacting African culture started a long time ago. So people don't have to go anywhere to experience Western culture. The West still is influential, has power, financial, economic, cultural, social power in so many ways that Africans don't have to leave Africa in order to enter into the Western world. It's here. And the West has colonized almost all of Africa, almost all of the African continent. So I'm very sure that while it might look different in other places, it's a similar story and experience in other nations and regions around Africa. I don't want to talk at you for too long because that's never fun. But the last point I kind of want to make about this article is this part where she says, unfortunately, it has become far too common for people to sympathize with people solely on the basis of their skin color. Such a worldview treats all people of color as a monolith, grossly mischaracterizing more than a billion people into a single identity. And so I agree with this from an outside perspective. There are still a lot of people that see Africa as just a single place when there is so much diversity. It's very true. And so I agree with this perspective. And I imagine that the commentary about people in Africa not being Black, that theme of the article probably comes from this place, right? Of this grossly mischaracterizing more than a billion people into a single identity. That is very true, absolutely true. And at the same time, I do think that we are growing as a global community. Generally speaking, we are growing in appreciation of the complexity of Black identity, of what it means to be Black, and that there's so much in what it is to be Black. But I think that if we deny Blackness, if we deny Africa, folks in Africa being called Black, it also ignores the truth that how people with our skin color are treated as a result of such a long history of westernization and the impact of Western um, colonization and imperialism for such a long time. The Blackness allows us to, I think, find a strength in that identity and that shared identity. That no matter where I go in the world, there is a sense of familiarity and family that I share with all Black folks. And I can recognize and celebrate that there are so many differences. And so I think it is important to do both. And I feel like we're just, because of history, that there are Black people, there are white people, there are indigenous people, there are Asian people, right? Because of history, I think that it just is what it is. But I think where we go moving forward is to continue to understand and appreciate that within those racial constructs that have been determined, that there is a great sense of diversity and beauty and magnificence within that. And that means appreciating tribal culture in Africa, as the article it refers to. But I think it would be a mistake to ignore that that there is that there are Black people, that there is a Black people in Africa. And I think the mistake would lie both in being able to combat the racism that we experience, and also in not being able to acknowledge and celebrate the beauty that is Blackness, and acknowledging the impact of Westernization that has truly influenced so much of the African continent in good ways and in problematic ways. I also wanted to talk just for a quick moment about the chapter, the essay that I gave you from this Bell Hooks book of essays called Talking Back, and this essay on self-recovery, because I think what she has to say about how people of color engage in their process of liberation, how they use language, how they talk back to the oppressor and their experience of oppression is not the same. That language of liberation can't be the same language not that it can't be, but she makes an observation of the language of liberation not being the same as the language of oppression and of the oppressed. And I think this connects to the article because I think there are so many, I will say Ghanaians, there are so many Ghanaians who aspire to Western culture, to go to the West, to marry from the West, all of that. Um, and in a sense, I think that what they're doing is seeing that as success and using what they see to try to better their lives, but without actually really understanding what Western culture is and has done, and what it would be like to be immersed in Western culture all the time. It's using, I see it as them using kind of that language and those tools of oppression to try and free themselves from what they think they are in. And in so many ways, I think that Ghanaians and Africans are freer, so much freer than Westerners. When I go back to the US to visit, I have a hard time because the capitalism, individualism, the rush and the fast pace and the unrealistic expectations of life and work is very different in Africa. It's very different in Ghana. And I think that in so many ways, Ghanaians see a certain image of the West and aspire to that without really appreciating the challenges that come along with that. And I think in so many ways, Ghanaians are living in liberated ways without even knowing it and recognizing it. And in some ways, are like giving that up in trying to adopt Western culture. And I think what Bell Hooks is saying is like, let's talk back to that. It is kind of a form of mental slavery. In doing so, of kind of aspiring to be what your oppressor has called you to be, or what the oppressor is, and recreating another cycle, another generation of oppressor. And so I think that Bell Hooks, in trying to talk back, and in self recovery is pushing against that idea that, you know, you're so much of, she doesn't specifically say this, but I think it's related, but so much of who Africans are and what they do, um, in that the tribal cultural sense is liberation, yet that's what they're pushing against, and they want to be more Western, and using more, using, going back to those cultural elements, and seeing the beauty and the glory in them, and not aspiring to Western culture, is really what I think self recovery is all about. So I thought that this was a, a helpful reading, and being able to think of what, what liberation really could look like, and why I think, and what folks should be aspiring to do, as related to the previous article, but not actually the reality of what's happening here in Ghana. All right. This lobby that I'm in is getting kind of loud, so it's good that I'm about to finish. I hope that was a helpful reflection, and I would love to hear your thoughts and questions. Your prof, my friend, can send them back to me, send them my way, and I'd be happy to respond and engage with you that way. Thank you for listening and engaging, and take care.